thank you very much for that. Now, I'm sure you have heard about the Global Travel and Tourism Resilience Council, a body that I was pleased to witness being formed some years ago, and I watched it grow and develop under the influence of my next guest, who's just walking onto stage. Have a seat. Who's possibly the best-known tourism minister in the world, I would say. Incredibly passionate and driven, and always on the move around the world, creating partnerships, forging new deals, always putting people first, no matter what the crisis we are facing is. There could be natural disasters, climate issues, COVID. He's been there to take the responsibility for the welfare of the small guys in particular, and especially the islands of the Caribbean. So we're going to have a little chat here about how we're going to solve all the world's problems, aren't we, Edmund? Yeah. So please put your hands together for Minister Edmund Bartlett from Jamaica. Okay, so by the way, congratulations on Jamaica surpassing its 2019 levels. And as you said, it's not a completely smooth story. There's other elements to it, and we're going to touch on that. But let's just get to the nub of this, because even more than ever, sustainability is front and center of all conversations about travel. So how encouraged are you by the actions taken by the big players, governments, and the private sector in the industry? Are you convinced it's more than rhetoric and greenwashing?
Well, I think we have to begin on the basis that the environment is the product. So that's what we market, that's what we sell. And let's start with perhaps a little look at the sociology of tourism, and you see the hierarchical arrangement. And at the top are the big boys who own the distribution systems and control the supply chain. Mm-hmm. And then in the middle are the local guys who are the providers of the experience. And then at the bottom are the workers, mm-hmm. those who are the ones that enable these experiences to be realized and to be consumed. So that triangle, if we would visualize it, represents then the structure of what tourism and travel is truly all about. So how serious and where's government in that?
Yeah.
Because government is somewhat out of that structure, but in that government through policy, legislative and regulatory arrangements, define the parameters within which that structure can function. It enables connectivity protocols between countries. Mm-hmm. We call some of it air service agreements, and then we have found what we call different freedoms. First freedom, second, third, seventh, and then open skies. Mm-hmm. So within that context, government provides a framework for tourism and travel. So at the top, where the big boys are, until technology overtakes them, which is happening fast,
yeah.
they still control. And so they determine the type of energy source that is used in tourism. And since we recognize that climate change is the number one threat to tourism,
yeah.
especially for small island states like ours that are dependent so much on the ocean and are influenced by weather conditions, weather patterns, seismic activity, and of course the other mega events such as terrorism and cyber crimes and so on and so on. But let's focus on the climate issue, because that's a big elephant in the room for island tourism in particular. But they decide where the guests go, where the tourist goes. So they decide what type of energy is being used by the big aircraft that they own. And it's a smaller and smaller number of people who are owning them.
Yeah.
And they decide also where the ships go, the cruise ships. And again, it's a smaller and smaller group of people who are owning them. And then in the middle, you have these tour operators, again, who decide where the guest goes, how many rooms they're buying from which hotel, and so on and so on and so forth.
Are they working together, though, Edmund?
So this is it. So the collaboration between them, with a recognition that we are losing the race on climate change. That we propose that we would have, I think, a 1.5 increase in temperatures, and we're running at 2.7
exactly.
to 2050 if we're not careful.
Yep.
So they need to realize it now at that end, at the big boys' end. And then government, through legislation and regulation, could ensure that there are limits to how far you go. There are rules of engagement in your destination. And those rules have at the base of it sustainability strategies.
When you say the big guys decide who goes where and what transport goes where and all that kind of stuff, and then the governments do their thing, are you saying that the big guys are in charge and that the governments are just have no real control over what the big guys do?
Well, as a public person, it's difficult to admit it. But the hardcore realities are that governments do respond to the drivers of the economy. And that you are foolish, or perhaps foolhardy, if you ignore what these drivers of the economy are saying. Because government, well, certainly neoliberal and laissez-faire type governments, free market governments, are not driven by state enterprise. They are driven by the market through the private sector. And therefore, you have to respond to what the private sector is saying. So yes, I would say that the private sector has a very strong hand in terms of what governments would do, policies that would be generated, and laws and regulations.
And we just had a session, Edmund, where we've had chiefs of some of those industries. And for example, SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, is only 0.1% or something ridiculous of the fuel that's being used. We are nowhere near getting close to that point where we can say 1.5 degrees is a viable option. Indeed. So what can be done about that? I mean, yes, there is recognition at conferences like this. They're here, they're admitting that, yep, something has to be done.
Well, let me tell you what I think. I think the only thing that can be done now is science. We're going to have to go back to science and the technologies that must emerge from innovation and to create more efficient ways of first of all, generating the energy, and two, the equipment that we're now producing, the aircraft that we're making, the cruise ships that we're building, the motor vehicles that we're building, the trains that we're building, all of that have to now respond to what I call the technological challenge of efficiencies, so that we utilize energy better and or are adapted to new forms of energy. Hydrogen, for example, but the issue with that is highly combustible, very difficult to manage and to operate. Have to be very careful about it. Nuclear, another very difficult and delicate, but these are sources of energy that are cleaner, that are greener, and that will enable us to get to that 1.5 or close to.
And are you confident that with technology, I think as Peter was just pointing out in the previous thing, that over time efficiencies of scale of economy will mean that these things become cheaper and therefore more viable? Because at the moment sustainable fuel is very expensive.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. But you see, the transformation process is what's going to determine to a large extent the rate of growth in these areas. So the faster we move to green energy is the greater the efficiencies, I believe, that we'll be able to generate from the critical mass that will entail, and then the economy of scale will chip in, naturally.
Yeah.
And so in a short while, the average guy with a little home in Jamaica
Yeah.
will be able to afford the
Yeah.
alternative energies that are provided.
Now you go around the world. You do talk to loads of people and loads of big influencers in the industries that we're talking about. At the receiving end of this is the little guys, like the island economies, like yours, like the Maldives, like Bangladesh, places that are going to basically be submerged. This is real shit, if I can say it, coming up.
Yes.
So how do you feel about that? Do you feel frustrated that you can't actually push them harder?
Well, sessions like these, and if we proliferate them, COP27, perhaps in Egypt down the road, Green Fund discussions, and also the drive for CSR in these companies, and a stronger education program where there's a recognition that we must ensure that in the DNA of business is sustainability consideration. That the bottom line in your balance sheet must reflect it, that you're investing in it because it has returns that's going to make life better for you down the road. So these are the recognition that has to be had now in order for us to be able to drive a real hope for these small island states that are hugely vulnerable. They are the ones that are going to be disappearing faster. Not the big guys, not the mega metropolis of the world, but the Maldives, the Jamaicas, the Cayman Islands, the Barbados, the Seychelles, and so on.
Yeah.
These are the countries that are going to be vulnerable, and where rising sea levels will devastate their coastal area and tourism with it. It has to be remembered that in these countries, over 70% of the tourism is driven by coastal.
The blue economy.
Blue economy.
Yeah.
And besides, they say the 3 S's louder than everybody else: sand, sea, and sun. And sand, sea, and sun can only survive if sustainability is the key word in our development the way forward. But I want to make a point about also the tourism that must emerge from this recovery. Because I discussed with you the sociology of tourism and this hierarchical structure, that pyramid. But the technology today, this highly, what I call hyper-connective society, creating from this knowledge age that has been forged, is changing the way that structure is going to function. Because it is taking away from the center the power of proprietary knowledge and information and distributing it to the peripheries.
You see that as a democratic good thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So more and more people, through this instrument, is knowing more, is taking greater control of their own lives with knowledge and information that allows them to make decisions, informed decisions. And then technology through the virtual experiences, this whole cognitive system that's now redefining the way in which we are operating, is helping us to see things, know things, touch things, feel things, decide on things even before we go to destinations,
not to
physically see them.
But not to replace the actual trip.
Not at all,
no. But
rather to augment it so that this whole discussion, for example, the latest one of the metaverse, and what happens in that virtual space, it gives you a sense of where you can go and to determine what it is that you want to see and where you want to go. And what it does is to remove that middle layer of the hierarchy I just discussed to you and insert you now as the individual. And what it also does is to create for the destination a new control of the asset called tourists, or what in economics we say the import, which we then export, called tourists. So the tourist is no longer owned by any entity that then transfers it to you, and you pay an enormous amount for that import that you then export. Now you can get that import for minimal cost because they are connected with you. They're on your platform. They're talking to you through social media and all sorts of other medium.
Yeah. We are going to very shortly actually have a session on data and a session on how governments, and you're going to be on that panel, how governments are working with the private sector to use the kind of knowledge and information that we're talking about. So we're going to pursue that point. Right. But I do want to end on this point for now, which is that you are calling, and I want to talk about this, you are calling for a global resilience fund, right? Yes. To help the very small islands, the countries that you're talking about. I mean, how realistic it is that, who's going to fund it? Tell me about, just a little bit about that.
Right. So in the same way that we have been trying to discuss resilience, sustainability, yeah, and to look at how we could measure sustainability, and in the process, how we could develop an index, a barometer. And then we can also look at what are the touch points that you follow to enable a sustainable operation. We can track the movement, for example, of our aircraft, the miles that they cover, and then the emissions, the CO2 emissions, and then we could tie some cost to that. So at the end, we could talk about perhaps an environmental tip or a, sustainability tip, mm-hmm, that each person could pay, each tourist, for example, whether it is about the food, the distance the food has to travel, the miles covered, etc., etc. In the same way, I think we need to look at resilience. And how do we measure the resilience? That is, the ability of a country to respond to disruptions, to recover, to mitigate, to recover quickly and then to thrive after disruptions. The big metropolitan countries with large budgets and great economies of scale and so on can manage this better. But the small countries that are hugely dependent on tourism but highly vulnerable and weakly resourced have the greatest difficulty to recover after disruptions. When a hurricane hits a Caribbean country like, say, Dominica, and devastates 98% of its GDP, it's years to recover because there are no resources. Even Puerto Rico, that has the great United States, as its benefactor, is struggling to recover.
Hawaii is in trouble.
Hawaii is in trouble, and we can go on. So what needs to happen now is that the global realities that disruptions are going to continue must be there. And therefore, how do we enable these smaller countries who are, in fact, the destination that your tourists are going? How are we going to help them to recover quickly and well? And so I thought that we needed to establish a fund in the same way that the World Bank has a fund, that IDB has a fund, to look at how do we move quickly to help Haiti, mm-hmm, that after earthquake 10, 20, 15 years ago, is still nowhere close, yeah, to recovering. The result of which is social decay and crime and violence and almost an unmanageable society resulting today, where the United States and Canada are now discussing how do we intervene to protect them and to save lives and put Haiti back on track. So these are the concerns that we have, and I think a fund is needed, and we can measure the critical impact of these disruptions on countries, and we can also look at how do we then contribute. Do we establish a resilience tip? So that when you go to the restaurant, a 1% is added because your food needs to be there always And so you need to build the capacity to build back fast to get your food quickly in.
So that's one way of raising the...
That's one way of raising it. Another way, of course, would be, I think, on destinations doing it directly, based off, obviously, on their vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And we perhaps develop a vulnerability scale. You see, one of the reasons I've established the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center in academia, at a university, is to enable that academic rigor so that young minds can be creating for us new ways, innovation, to define how we do things better and how we are able to recover faster and more efficiently.
And that's exactly what we are going to talk about in the panel coming up.
Yes.
But I do want to ask you, just finally, how close are you to getting this fund?
Well, we are in the discussion stage, and hopefully this little fireside chat has helped to stimulate even further thought on it. We need more ideas to come forward as to how it can be done, because part of the concern is the cynicism about these global things, and where does the money go, and who manages it, and does it really reach the people and the countries that is really intended to. In other words, does it go to the needy or the greedy? You know, and so on. So these are concerns that we have to work through. The UN is accepting, in the process of accepting, I can't preempt them, the recommendation by Jamaica for a global tourism resilience and day to be established. So we have proposed the 17th of February every year to be designated as Global Tourism Resilience Day. The world stands and reflects on the importance of building resilience. We look at how to do it, how to create the institutional mechanisms and the capacity for people and countries to recover properly when disruptions hit them. So if we get that one going, and I'm announcing the date again, it's February 17, 2023 in Kingston, Jamaica. And we're inviting the world, those who can make it, yes, those who can't. And we know the vast majority won't. But virtually, you can connect. But the commitment, let us commit to build resilience and to fund resilience.
Okay, let's see what happens. Edmund, for now, because you're about to come back on stage anyway, for now, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Edmund Bartlett, ladies and gentlemen.